It was my mother Bess's 60th birthday. Outside, a light snow was falling. The streets of Boston had already been blanketed in winter's gray, and people rushed past with collars up and heads down. I stood in front of the old house holding a large pet carrier, nervous despite myself. Inside was a Maine Coon with a thick, luxurious coat, a cat I had carefully selected and reserved a full month in advance. She used to say that when she was younger, all she ever wanted was a cat. But life had always gotten in the way: groceries, bills, the weight of everyday survival. Every time we passed a pet store or saw someone on the street cradling a kitten, she would stop, watch quietly for a moment, then whisper, "I wish I had one like that." So this time I made it happen. When I stepped inside, she was in the kitchen scrubbing the stove. She turned at the sound of my voice, and her eyes lit up the moment she saw the carrier in my arms. "Is that?" I nodded. "Happy birthday, Mom. You've always said you wanted a cat to keep you company." I remembered. She froze for a second, then lifted her hand to her mouth. Her eyes welled up instantly. The cat peeked out from the carrier and let out a soft meow, as if acknowledging her emotion. But before she could even reach out, a sharp, impatient voice rang from the living room. "What the hell is this?" My father, Bard, had risen from the couch, his eyes darting between the cat and my mom with a look of pure disapproval. He stepped closer, his voice low and bitter. "You spent money on that?" I opened my mouth to explain, but my mother instinctively shielded the carrier, her voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't me. Faye got it for me." "Got it for you? Do you have any idea how much these things cost? Do you even know how little you get from Social Security? And you've got the nerve to accept something like that?" His voice rose, sharp and cutting. Footsteps thudded down the stairs. My younger brother, Bobby, shuffled into view, his face still puffy with sleep. "Seriously, Mom? Are you losing it? What about the food? The litter? The vet bills? Who's paying the gas next month?" The room grew thick with tension. My mother stood at the edge of the kitchen, clutching the trembling cat. She didn't say a word. I looked at her hands, calloused and worn from decades at the stove, now gently wrapped around a tiny creature that had done nothing but exist. And in that moment I saw something that felt both familiar and completely alien. She was the one celebrating her birthday, yet she looked like a trespasser in her own home. I drew a breath. "Dad, I gave her the cat. She's always wanted one." "I don't care who gave it," he snapped. "It's not staying. This house is messy enough. I don't want to see that thing here." The cat let out a high-pitched yelp, startled. My mom tried to soothe it, but before she could, my father grabbed the carrier out of her hands. I lunged forward. "Dad, it's snowing outside." "So what? It's got fur, doesn't it?" he said, already swinging the door open. A blast of icy wind hit my face like a slap. Snowflakes stung my skin. "Bard, don't." My mother's voice cracked behind me. But he didn't stop. He stormed out to the front steps and set the carrier down, whipping around to throw one last blow. "You want a cat? Wait until you can afford one." He slammed the door shut behind him. Silence. My mom stood frozen by the entrance, staring at the snow and the small, shivering carrier on the porch. Her gaze fractured like glass. The wind whooshed in again. I followed her eyes to the cat, curled into a ball, shaking from cold and fear. Slowly she crouched down, cupping her face in both hands, and began to sob, quiet, broken sobs that twisted something deep inside me. I walked over and rested a hand gently on her shoulder. She didn't look up. "You know, Faye," she murmured, "I used to believe if I just held on long enough, things would get better." She sniffed, her voice still trembling but steadier than before. "When your father started his business, his temper was already bad. I told myself he was under stress, that I should be more considerate. I could handle it. Then Bobby was born and he told me to quit teaching at all. Said the family needed me. But it wasn't about need. It was about control. About making sure I had no ground to stand on, no voice to raise. I thought once you kids were grown, once we were older, he'd mellow out, but I'm 65 today. And not only did he not say happy birthday, he threw away the one thing I've wanted my whole life." She finally looked up at me. Her eyes were wet, but something new flickered there, something calm, unfamiliar, unshakable. "I'm not leaving because of the cat, Faye. I'm leaving because I finally understand. I've never been allowed to want anything in this house." I didn't say a word. I just held out my hand. She hesitated for a second, then placed hers in mine and squeezed. I nodded. Let's go. She stood, reached for the shaking kitten and held it close, like she was holding the version of herself that had been waiting for decades to be seen. The door closed behind us with a soft click. No one came after us. No one called her name. The snow kept falling. The wind was still biting. But for the first time I knew, my mother was finally walking toward something that looked a lot like freedom. That night we rushed to a 24-hour emergency vet clinic. The kitten was diagnosed with hypothermia and extreme weakness. The vet said if we had arrived any later, it might not have made it. My mom sat on a bench in the waiting room all night, eyes fixed on the glass door that separated her from the tiny hospital bed. Exhaustion was etched into every line on her face. She clutched an old scarf tightly in her hands, the one I gave her when I left for college. And just like back then, she sat silently, absorbing the pain with no one to share it with. I watched her and couldn't help but think about the life she had lived, or more precisely, the years she'd been trapped. When she was young, my mom was one of the brightest women in our town. Her name was Bess. She taught piano at the local school and wrote essays that were occasionally printed in the local paper. Parents praised her for her talent and patience, saying her music could calm even the rowdiest children. The town library invited her to host reading events. People respected her. She had a presence. She never dressed fancy, but she was always neat and composed. When she smiled, faint lines would form at the corners of her eyes, like little crescent moons. My dad, Bard, was back then considered an ambitious man. He ran a small construction supply business, charming and driven. In just a few years he made a name for himself. When he was courting my mom, he used to wait outside the music room every day after work, even pretended to learn piano, saying, "I just want to understand you better." My mom was young and soft-hearted. Maybe she really did believe that love was something people could grow into. But within the first year of marriage he asked her to sell the piano. He said, "Why do you need to work? I can take care of you." And then, "You're around those kids' dads all day, I don't like it." She stopped teaching piano. Stopped writing too. He said writing didn't bring in money. Said it was a waste of time. She gave in. Quit her job, got pregnant, gave birth to me and then my brother. At first she tried to push back. But every argument ended with Bard going completely silent for days. No talking, no eating, no helping with anything. The house would turn into an icebox of quiet tension. She was always the one to give in. Not because she was weak, but because she didn't want me and my brother to grow up in a war zone. When I got a little older and more aware, I once asked her, "Do you regret it?" She gave a tired smile. "Regret doesn't stop the days from coming." Then she turned and went back to the kitchen. Her life ran on a loop. Up at 6, coffee brewing, toast warming, school drop-offs, laundry, cleaning, cooking, tutoring my brother, clearing the table, taking out the trash, wiping the windows. At night, she'd get maybe 10 minutes to herself on the balcony, looking out over the scattered lights of our small town, standing completely still. Once I got up late for water and saw her there alone. In her hands was a faded old notebook. I crept closer and saw the title, "The Afternoon's Music," an essay she'd written years ago. She was still using a pencil, carefully editing each word, stroke by stroke. Like the writer in her had never truly left. That's when I realized she wasn't someone who settled for a small life. She was someone pulled under by it. It wasn't that she never tried to break free. But every time she reached for something more, she was told, "The kids are still young." And every time she dared to push back, she was smothered with, "Don't bring trouble into this house." When my brother was born, Bard looked her dead in the eye and said, "Don't even think about working again. You've got 2 kids now. I bring in the money. You handle the house." He didn't ask. He declared. And she nodded, saying only, "I understand." Then she wiped down the digital piano that had seen her through countless nights and gave it away to the neighbor's kid. Later I asked, "Why didn't you keep it?" She said, "Your dad thought it was in the way." She didn't cry. He didn't yell. She said it so quietly. But my heart sank inch by inch. I remembered something she once wrote before getting married. "I want my life to carry more than the scent of a stovetop. I want ink on paper and the warmth of piano keys." But from the day she married my dad, all she got was the stovetop. She'd thought about leaving. I knew that. One time Bard came home drunk and screamed at her, "Go ahead and leave me. See how far you can get. You'll possibly be begging on the street by morning." You think anyone's gonna help you? She stood in the corner like a nail almost pulled from the wall. Frozen. I was just a kid then, too young to know what begging really meant. I only knew Dad was yelling and it scared me. I ran to protect her, but she gently pushed me behind her and said, "It's okay, he's just drunk." But she was the only one who'd ever really been sober. The only one who saw things clearly. The tragedy was, no one ever let her live in that clarity. That night, for the first time, I truly saw what was in her eyes. A deep, heavy loss. It was as if she'd spent the last 30 years living under someone else's roof. And now, finally, she was ready to stand up. The day my mother finally moved out of that suffocating house, the wind was colder than it had been all week. Bess wore her faded cotton coat, its fabric thinned from years of washing. Her posture was brisk, almost startlingly so. She didn't glance around the house one last time, didn't double-check the drawers or cabinets, didn't linger at the door. She simply held the frail cat close to her chest and walked out. I carried an old leather suitcase beside her. Inside were a few changes of clothes and a small red storage box, something she'd kept to herself for 3 decades, her only private space in that house. Even Bard had never truly looked inside. By the time we unloaded everything into her new apartment, dusk had fallen. It was a modest place near the ocean, just 10 minutes from where I worked. The apartment wasn't big, but it was clean and bright, with a faint scent of sea salt in the air. Through the window, you could see a sliver of the horizon, and on clear days sunlight would spill across the kitchen floor in golden angles. Mom settled into the fabric couch in the living room, the kitten curled into a ball on her lap. She stroked its back gently and whispered, "It's so quiet here." I nodded and walked over to take her hand. "You can finally get some real sleep now." She smiled, but her eyes were damp. Not from sadness, but something else. Something called relief. A feeling so unfamiliar on her face that it almost looked out of place. The next morning, I took her to a local community bank to help her open a new account. We were standing at the counter when a thought suddenly struck me. "Mom," I said, "you always told us you had no money. How did you afford to raise me and Bobby? Especially those art classes you enrolled me in when Dad was so against it." She blinked, then gave a sheepish smile. "I saved it from grocery money, bits here and there. And sometimes neighbors would give me cash for helping mow their lawns or watching their dogs. I never had my own account, so I just kept it hidden." Then she added quietly, "It wasn't for me. It was always for you too. You loved painting, so I signed you up even if it meant tightening things elsewhere. Your brother loved sports. Those fees weren't cheap either, but I figured it out." My chest tightened. I gripped the edge of the counter, my throat thick. "Well," I said, trying to steady my voice, "now you can have an account that's just yours." She nodded and slowly opened the little red box, her hands tentative. Inside were bundles of old envelopes bound with rubber bands. Some were yellowed with age, a few were worn at the corners. She pulled out a stack and handed it to me. "This is everything I saved from grocery money, side jobs, little things. I just kept it all here." I flipped through them. Each envelope held 20s, 50s, and the occasional small bills, neatly organized and labeled by year. "This is..." I couldn't finish the sentence. She looked down, chuckled lightly with embarrassment. "I couldn't save a lot at once, so I just stashed what I could. Thought maybe one day it'd help you or Bobby. I never had my own account, so I guess this was my little treasure box." My throat burned. Those bills weren't just money, they were fragments of 30 years. 30 years of quiet sacrifice, tucked between grocery lists and evenings on the balcony. 30 years of clawing back scraps of freedom, $1 at a time. Then she said softly, "Don't underestimate your mom. I know how to count too." I couldn't speak. I just nodded and carefully tucked the envelopes away, as if sealing up a story she had written with silence and self-denial. A history made not with grand declarations, but with resilience, restraint, and love. Meanwhile, over on their side of the story, Bard and Bobby were living it up like nothing had ever happened. A few days later, Bobby posted a video on social media, and made sure to tag me. He was sitting in Martha's kitchen, chewing on a thick steak. Behind him was her carefully curated open-concept layout, all soft lighting and decorative shelves. The table was set with red wine, scented candles, and what looked like a very expensive carving knife. His tone was smug, like he was delivering some kind of victory speech. "Dad's been eating dinner at Martha's lately. And guess what? Her lamb chops blow those bland healthy meals Mom used to make right out of the water. At the end of the video he even panned the camera to catch Martha's daughter Jody standing by with a spice jar, like some dutiful sidekick. The caption read, "Family dinners the way they're meant to be." When the video popped up on my phone, the screen actually seemed to blur for a second. My mom was right next to me at the time, quietly flipping through a digital cookbook. She was learning how to make a low-fat ricotta salad. I went to swipe the video away, but she glanced over just in time to see it. She didn't say anything, just let out a soft laugh. They wanted me to see that, didn't they? I frowned. It's pathetic. She nodded. It's fine. I used to cook every day and they'd make faces with every bite. If someone else wants to play perfect mom now, let her. Her voice was so light it made me uneasy. Mom, are you okay? She reached down and stroked the kitten curled in her lap. I used to get it all wrong. Now that no one's asking me to do anything, I can finally try what I want. Like today, I want to learn how to make a French dessert. She stood up, headed to the kitchen, poured some milk and began pulling out all kinds of ingredients from the cabinet. I watched her move around the stovetop, precise and graceful, and it hit me, she wasn't running from her past. He was finally learning how to live. But Bard clearly wasn't ready to let us go that easily. The next evening Bobby called. His tone was sharp, agitated. "Faye, you can't just walk out like that. Dad doesn't cook, the fridge is empty." I leaned against the doorframe, watching my mom on the couch with the cat in her lap, calmly munching on dried apple slices while watching a cooking show. Holding the phone, I said quietly, "Don't you have Martha? I thought her cooking was better than Mom's." Silence. Then click. The call ended. I think that was the moment they realized we really weren't coming back. By the 4th week after leaving my father's house, life with Mom had found its rhythm. Each morning she blended homemade cat food puree for the kitten. At noon she watched cooking tutorials and experimented with new recipes. By evening she curled up on the couch knitting me a scarf, occasionally gazing out the window toward the sea. I could tell she was finally, truly beginning to relax. But not everyone was moving toward the light. One afternoon during my lunch break, as I was finishing up a presentation draft in the office lounge, my phone lit up with a notification. New family life, #blessed #. It was a video from Bobby. He stood outside Martha's garage, next to a silver Tesla gleaming in the sunlight, a big red bow fastened to the hood. He flashed the keys toward the camera, grinning like a game show winner. "Shout out to Dad for the early Christmas gift. New family, new momentum. Martha's roast beef tonight, can't wait." He exaggerated the words Dad and Martha, making sure they landed with extra weight, and of course he tagged me. The caption came with a laughing crying emoji and, just to twist the knife, a cat emoji. I stared at the cartoon cat, my fingers brushing the edge of the screen. The message couldn't have been clearer. You too have your little cat and your quiet dinners. We've got cars, beef and laughter. I closed the video without replying. That night over dinner I told my mom about it. She was stirring her first attempt at chicken and rice stew in an old aluminum pot, scraping bits from the edge as I spoke. "He's never posted anything like that before," I said. "He used to whisper to me all the time how greasy Martha was, how she acted like she was in some cheap soap opera." She chuckled. "Maybe now he thinks it's his turn to be the lead in that soap opera." I looked at her. "You're really not mad?" She set down the spoon and turned to me, her voice calm but firm. "Mad? Of course I'm mad. But if getting mad would make him return the car or grow a conscience, I'd go break this pot over his head right now." I was quiet for a beat. She continued. "But you know what matters more? I'm done spending my time being angry. I gave them 30 years. The next 30 days, 30 months, those are mine now." In that moment I realized, her sharpest weapon wasn't rage. It was calmness, it was clarity. The next day I took her to open her first official bank account. At the counter, her hands trembled slightly as she filled out the form. I guided her through each step, but I kept sneaking glances at her face, especially at the moment she wrote down her own name. She looked like someone finally stamping her own life with a seal of ownership. Afterward we sat at a cafe next to the bank. She ordered a vanilla latte and took a careful sip. "This $5 coffee," she said. "I never let myself buy it before. But now I have my own account. I can." I smiled. "And that money in your account? You earned it. One lawn mowed, one stitch at a time. No one gets to tell you what to do with it. She nodded. In that moment she looked like a new driver clutching a license for the first time. Nervous, excited but glowing. But before our new life could truly take off, the old one reached out to tap us on the shoulder. That afternoon, I got an email from Bobby. Attached was a scanned letter signed by my father, Bard. This property was purchased independently before the marriage. It does not fall under her marital assets. If she wants to come back, she better forget about the money. Along with it was a photocopy of the deed, with one line underlined in red ink. Owner Bard Miller. In the body of the email, Bobby had written, "Faye, I know things might be tough for you and Mom right now. Dad said if you both take some time to think it over, maybe coming home isn't off the table. Leaving in a huff is easy, but it's smart to know your limits. That house is still where you both belong." Polite. Soothing. At least at the pretended surface. Like he was auditioning for the role of family mediator. But underneath it all was that same old smugness. No matter how far you go, the power is still ours. I almost laughed. Apologize. He really thinks he's some kind of monarch. I forwarded the email to Mom. She read it once, said nothing and set the phone aside. Then she quietly walked into her room. A few minutes later she returned with an old photo album. She set it in front of me and opened it to the first page. A photo of her at 22 wearing a pale pink suit, performing at the town's music festival. She was on stage, eyes lit up like stars. She said, "That year he sat in the front row and said, 'If you marry me you'll never have to worry about money again.'" She paused, then looked at me with a clarity that sliced the air between us. Now I know what he meant was, "Whatever you want, I'll be the one to decide if you get it." I nodded. It's time we talked to a lawyer. By the time we left the law office, the sky had already darkened. Mom stood on the balcony, holding a printout in her hands, her full name at the top, followed by the preliminary details of her divorce petition. She stared at it for a long time, then said softly, "You know, Faye? This is the first time in over 20 years I've ever written just my name on an official document." I didn't say anything. I simply stepped beside her and stood quietly. Neither of us mentioned Bard and Bobby's email. That whole, "you have no place outside this family," threat had long since stopped being frightening. It had become something else. Confirmation. Confirmation that we no longer belonged to that house. The next morning Mom was up before me. She wore a pale blue button-down shirt and was frying eggs in the kitchen, humming softly to herself. The tune was quiet but tender. "What song is that?" I asked. He smiled a bit shy. "Something I used to play when I taught piano. I think it's the opening to Claire de Lune." Then she paused as if remembering something. "Do you remember that old keyboard case from the move? Is it still in the cabinet on the balcony?" I nodded and pulled it out from the bottom shelf. Inside was a portable electric keyboard, worn with time but polished to a shine. "Your father made me give away the real piano," she said, gently brushing a key. "But I couldn't let go of this one. I kept it hidden on top of the closet all these years." That afternoon she sat down and began to play. Her fingers were a little rusty but the melody smoothed out quickly. Her back straightened. Her gaze sharpened. Her hands moved like they were recalling a language she'd once spoken fluently. I sat on the couch just watching her light return. He wasn't reminiscing. She was reclaiming. From that day on she practiced for an hour every morning. At my suggestion she started recording short piano clips and uploading them online. In the afternoons she taught herself how to shoot, edit and post videos. I even found her a volunteer opportunity at a local library. A small community gig where she could play soft background music for readers every Friday afternoon. On her first day she was so nervous her palms were soaked, and she nearly brought the sheet music upside down. But once she sat down at the second-hand upright piano and placed her fingers on the keys, the uncertainty vanished. She chose Moon River. The music spilled from the speakers like the start of a dream. A single mom passing by paused and whispered to her daughter, "My mom used to play this when I was little. I haven't heard it in years." A man in a beret flipped a page in his book, paused and turned back to reread it. Maybe the song had stopped him mid-thought. I filmed her from the corner and uploaded the clip to her new channel with the title, "My Mom Finds Her Music Again After 20 Years. To our surprise, it had over 600 likes in a week. One of the top comments read, "This Moon River is soaked in time." You can hear the life in it. When she read the comments, her eyes welled up. You know, she said, back when I taught, what scared me most wasn't having no students. It was playing in front of someone who'd say, "What's so special about that?" But now, I realize having someone listen and appreciate it, that's an extraordinary kind of happiness. I nodded. That night she played longer than usual. Her final piece was her favorite. What a wonderful world. As she finished the last few bars, yes, I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Her fingers lingered on the keys. Then she whispered, I think I'm ready to file the paperwork this week. I looked at her. Her eyes were calm. Are you sure? She nodded. I always thought I couldn't live without that house. Now I know, I should have left it a long time ago. I smiled. Then I guess it's time we prepare for one beautiful fight. The day Mom filed the divorce papers was a bright, clear Monday. Sunlight poured across our apartment's small balcony, where the cat was dozing lazily by the window. Bess sat at the round table in a pale gray cardigan, carefully reviewing the legal documents I had printed out. Her expression was neutral, but I could see it. Her shoulders sat straighter than they had in months. When she signed her name, she paused for a second. I can't even remember the last time I made a decision completely on my own, she said with a soft smile. Well, this counts, I replied gently. That day we officially initiated the legal proceedings. My friend Elena, a sharp and no-nonsense attorney, took on the case. She looked us squarely in the eyes and said, You're not just getting a divorce. You're reclaiming everything that was taken from her. She promised to dig into every lead, trace every asset, and build a case that would not just be winnable, but unignorable. But before we could even send the formal demand letter, a phone call threw everything off course. It was Bobby. He sounded panicked. Why haven't you come back yet? Dad's in the hospital, didn't you know? I got to the ER waiting room as fast as I could. They told me it was a TIA, transient ischemic attack. A mini-stroke, mild but serious enough to shake things. While filling out forms at the nurse's station, I saw Bobby slouched in a corner, scrolling through his phone and rhythmically kicking the chair leg. The moment he saw me, he sprang up and hissed, You've been stressing him out. He's old, he can't take this. You both need to come home. Now. I stared at him. You mean you want my mom to come back and take care of him? Or do you think getting sick suddenly erases 3 decades of what he did to her? He flinched. Didn't respond. Then he threw out something that momentarily took my breath away. Mom's the one who abandoned us. She's the one who should take responsibility for all this. I almost laughed. My little brother, who lived rent-free in Martha's house, who bragged online about Teslas and lamb roasts, was suddenly the moral compass? Your whole family might as well carve a statue for Martha at this point, I said, voice low but deliberate. And now you suddenly remember my mom exists? Bit late, don't you think? He turned without a word and walked back toward the ER. I didn't tell Mom everything. Just said, Dad's in the hospital. It's not too serious. She nodded. Calm as ever. The next morning she surprised me with a question. If I gave up now, if I didn't go through with the divorce, do you think people would say I'm gracious, forgiving? Something in my chest tightened. He paused, then continued. When I was younger, I thought being a good wife, or a good mother, was the only way to matter. But the more I tried to be who everyone wanted me to be, the more I disappeared. She went quiet for a moment, her gaze drifting toward the keyboard by the window. After that library performance, a woman left a comment on my video. She said she used to sit with her son at piano lessons. He hated it, but she always dreamed of playing. When she heard me play Moon River, she said it reminded her of the girl she used to be. I grinned. So you resurrected a mom's lost youth? She smiled back. How I want to reclaim mine. I knew she had wavered, but I also knew that moment had made her steadier than ever. We scheduled another meeting with Elena to move into the next phase. Elena advised us to collect key evidence focusing on 2 areas. The first, misappropriation of marital assets. Bard had used joint funds to purchase expensive items for Martha. A car, jewelry, home appliances, and more. And then, marital breakdown and psychological control, including financial coercion, lifestyle restrictions, and a persistent pattern of emotional neglect. I helped Mom dig through old records and credit card statements. We found joint account bills with large purchases, ones made while she wasn't even present. We also unearthed screenshots of early emails Bard had written to Martha. The language was intimate, and the dates aligned disturbingly well with family expenses that had always mysteriously gone missing. Elena reviewed the documents and nodded. We've got more than enough. I turned to Mom. Are you ready? She took a deep breath. This isn't a battle, it's a farewell. To the version of me who stayed. That evening after dinner she played bridge over troubled water. As her fingers floated over the keys she turned to me with a smile. You'd be a bridge for me, wouldn't you? When I need it. I smiled. Always. She nodded. I want to become that kind of person for myself too. Watching her play I felt something shift, like a childhood memory reawakening. There she was again, the quiet, stubborn woman from my earliest years. The one who had always had music in her but never the space to let it out. Now finally she was playing just for herself. I'll never forget the weather that morning, cold but bright. Like a blank sheet of paper, crisp and untouched, waiting for someone to write the ending. The courthouse was unusually quiet. Bess sat beside the plaintiff's table, dressed in her beige wool coat, her hair pinned up perfectly, her expression composed. She wore barely any makeup except for a soft rosewood shade on her lips, calm, resilient and quietly resolute. I sat behind her, palms damp, but I didn't say a word. I didn't want to break her focus. Bard arrived in a dark gray suit, his expression grim. With him was his attorney, sharp-tongued, seasoned and clearly expensive. Bobby didn't come. Neither did Martha. Bard stood alone, like a general who didn't bring enough soldiers, but still refused to admit he'd already lost the war. The judge was a woman in her 60s wearing rimless glasses. Her voice was measured, her tone unwavering. The hearing opened with the defense. Bard's lawyer began confidently. This marriage lasted over 3 decades. However, the assets in question were largely acquired under the defendant's name. The plaintiff, having no significant income, did not directly contribute to household earnings. Thus, this is not a case for financial restitution. I could hear the grind of my own teeth. Then it was our turn. Elena stood calmly and began submitting evidence to the court. Joint account transactions used for non-household expenses, high-value jewelry receipts, a vehicle purchase agreement. Most transactions were dated during periods when Bess was verifiably not present. These are not routine expenditures, Elena said. They represent repeated high-value gifts to a third party, violating the fiduciary duty within a marital relationship. Bard scowled, whispering to his lawyer, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. But it wasn't the receipts that silenced the room. It was Bess's personal statement. The judge turned to her. Mrs. Bess Miller, would you like to offer a personal statement about the marriage? She nodded gently and walked to the stand. She didn't look at anyone. She stared ahead, focused on some invisible point in the distance, as if telling a story she'd rehearsed 1,000 times, and this was the first time anyone truly listened. Her voice trembled slightly but held firm. I was still teaching piano when we got married. I had a small studio. Most afternoons I'd play Clair de Lune just for myself. He used to say, "Marry me and you'll never worry about money again." But within the first year he told me to sell the piano. Said there was no space for it. She paused and inhaled deeply. After that I quit my job at his request. I raised our kids. Cooked 3 meals a day. Washed, cleaned, ran the house. Every cent I spent I had to ask him first. He told me I didn't know how to manage money, so I stopped trying. He told me I shouldn't have too many friends, so I stopped going out. I thought being quiet meant keeping the marriage intact. I thought if I behaved I'd be treated with some respect. She gave a dry smile, not bitter but worn. I was wrong. He never saw me as a partner. I was a cook, a maid, a nurse. Sometimes I think he valued his car more than me. Her voice steadied. On my 60th birthday he kicked out the kitten my daughter gave me. Said, "If you want a cat you can't live in this house." That's when I realized, 30 years of devotion didn't even earn me the right to keep one small animal I could call mine. The courtroom was still. Then she turned to the judge. Her voice rang out, clear and unwavering. "I'm not here to bargain. I'm asking for justice. I gave this family nearly 40 years. I only want back the bricks I helped lay." The judge nodded and asked her to return to her seat. Behind us I could hear someone quietly sniffling in the gallery. Bard remained stone-faced. His attorney stood and countered, calm and precise. The plaintiff contributed no income, yet enjoyed 30 years of marital stability. There is no measurable financial damage to justify compensation. Elena rose without hesitation. We have provided ample evidence showing the plaintiff was subjected to sustained financial and emotional control. This is not about splitting assets. It's about compensating a woman for the life that was taken from her. The judge looked down, flipping through the case file. A long pause followed. Then she looked up, her tone measured but firm. The court supports the plaintiff's claim. The marriage is hereby dissolved. The property in question will be re-evaluated and divided equitably. Furthermore, given the plaintiff's decades of unpaid labor and financial disenfranchisement, the defendant is ordered to pay a one-time emotional damages settlement of $35,000. Beside me, I heard my mother exhale, long and soft. The sound of release. When we walked out of the courthouse, her steps were lighter than I'd ever seen them. Sunlight landed on her face, and for the first time in years she looked younger. "Faye," she turned to me suddenly, her eyes bright. "Do you know what today means to me?" I smiled. "You won." She shook her head. I finally walked out of his world, for good. That weekend, after the divorce ruling came through, we got home late. Bess folded the court order neatly and tucked it into the lining of her red storage box. Then she stood in the middle of the living room, taking everything in like she was truly seeing it for the first time. The curtains were ones she had altered by hand. The table was covered with a blue and white checkered cloth she'd found at a flea market. A patchwork quilt she'd sewn 6 months ago was draped across the couch. She let out a quiet breath. "Well," she said softly, "I guess it's my turn now, to start choosing how to live." The next day she took me to a small apartment building on the west side of town. 3 stories high, pale yellow exterior with a little south-facing terrace on the top floor. Bess pulled a key from her coat pocket and slid it into the lock with a deliberate click. "This is going to be my studio," she said with a smile. "I paid 6 months' rent. The owner's a sweetheart. He said if I perform once a month at the community center, he'll even give me a discount." Inside it was empty but bright. Outlets in the corners, a perfect nook by the window for her keyboard. Her eyes sparkled. That night we laid out a picnic blanket on the floor and ate takeout. She popped a fry into her mouth and said, "You know what I've always dreamed of? Just once I wanted to teach someone how to play a song I love. Not just whatever the textbook says I'm supposed to teach." "How you can," I said. She nodded. "Faye, it really does feel like freedom has a taste." I bit into a slice of pizza. "What does it taste like?" He grinned. "Ketchup and salt." In the weeks that followed, we launched what we jokingly called the Renaming Mom Project. I helped her register a business license and set up a YouTube channel called Granny's Keys. Each week, she uploaded a short piano performance, sometimes with a story from her life, or a sweet reply to someone's comment. A friend of mine from college designed her logo and banner. We reached out to her old friend Debbie, a volunteer at the community theater, to help us with local outreach. We printed dozens of flyers and left them at the library, senior center, local cafes, and even a vet clinic. Soon her first event was scheduled, an afternoon of stories song in her studio, where she'd teach 10 neighbors a simple tune and share a memory from her past. Susan, our former neighbor in her 70s who rarely left the house, showed up for the very first session, carrying sandwiches and homemade cookies. After hearing Bess tell a story about how she secretly learned left-hand octaves while cooking dinner, Susan patted her hand and said, "I used to love dancing, gave it up after I got married. You made me realize I'm not done yet." When the session ended, the room broke into applause. Standing by her keyboard, Bess turned to me, almost disbelieving. "Do you think they really liked it?" I smiled. "Mom, your stories are better than any PowerPoint I've ever made. And you're playing? Don't even get me started." She blushed, like a little girl who just found out she aced her first test. Meanwhile, word began to trickle in about Bard. After the hearing, he reportedly spiraled into a sulk. Martha, once so smug, had started pulling away. She'd assumed Bess would walk away with nothing. But after the ruling, Bard not only had to pay the settlement, he also had to sell part of his assets to cover it. Then Bobby texted me. "Martha's been too busy lately. Stopped inviting us over for dinner. And Dad's payout messed up my business plans. He said he can't help anymore." I didn't respond. He sent a second text. I blocked him. No guilt. Not this time. 2 months later, Bess was invited to perform on a local radio segment. She played You've Got a Friend and spoke about how, after her divorce, the support of her daughter and her friends helped her find her way back to the stage. When she finished, the host leaned in and said, "Bess, your story is exactly what this show is about because aging isn't the end. It's the start of something new." She laughed modestly, but I knew she heard it. And believed it. That night we came home to a mailbox stuffed full of thank you cards. All from neighbors who had attended her piano story workshops. One said, "You reminded me of my grandma singing in the kitchen." Another read, "You made me believe it's not too late to begin again at 60. And one anonymous note said, "You didn't erase the past. You made it shine again." We sat together reading them one by one. She held the cat in her lap, pressed a card to her chest and whispered, "I think I'm finally not afraid of getting older." I looked at her. "Mom, the way you are now, who could even think of calling you old?" She laughed, and the wrinkles at the corners of her eyes bloomed like a flower in full light. This spring was unusually warm. Sunlight slipped through the gap in the curtains, spilling across the piano keys like a gentle invitation. And for the first time in her life, my mother received an invitation she had never dared to imagine. A local television station reached out with a proposal. They were producing a docuseries called Starting Over and wanted to feature her. The producer called her directly. "We want to tell a story about taking the stage after 60. You were the first person who came to mind." I watched her take the call, her expression stunned, like the idea itself didn't quite compute. When she hung up, she turned to me slowly. "They said they want to pay me to perform and film a short documentary." I couldn't hold back a smile. "How's that for full circle? The stage they forced you to give up is now calling you back, with a spotlight." She laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that carried something unspoken beneath it, something luminous and wild. "What should I wear? Should I curl my hair? Should I get new shoes?" She began scribbling notes on paper like an excited senior prepping for graduation. Repertoire list. Opening remarks. Lighting preferences. Teleprompter location. We rented a small local theater. Seats for just 100, but with professional sound and lighting. I rallied friends for promotion. Debbie brought her theater buddies to help arrange the seating. Several neighbors from her piano storytelling group designed handmade programs. The cover bore a photo of Bess with a bold headline. "She's 60 and finding her voice." This is not her finale, it's her debut. On the day the TV crew arrived to film rehearsal footage, Bess tried on 2 different outfits. She kept fussing in the mirror. "Is this neckline too low? Is this color too loud? Do real concert pianists still wear black gowns?" I rested my hands on her shoulders. "You're not a version of someone else. You're the original. They'll wear what you wear." He paused, surprised. Then nodded. "Then I'll wear the emerald green dress I sewed myself. The one I bought with my first paycheck after the divorce." At rehearsal she opened with You've Got a Friend. The cameraman filmed over her shoulder as sunlight pooled across her fingers. The image on the monitor was soft and golden. I stood at the edge of the room watching, eyes misting over. By the time performance day was a week away, the event was sold out. The community center even added a new beginner piano class, filled entirely with women over 50. They said, "Her story feels like our story. We want to hear her play. We want to hear her speak." The night before the performance, Mom and I sat together backstage. She was seated at the piano, her hands resting on the keys but not playing, whispering to them almost. "I want to add one more song," she said softly. "What song?" She looked up. "Both Sides Now." And I knew. I knew immediately. Joni Mitchell had written it in 1969. A song about looking back at life, love and loss and realizing, I really don't know life at all. "I used to think love meant sacrifice," she whispered. "That being a good wife meant staying quiet. But now, I know life isn't about enduring. It's about choosing." I took her hand. "Then tomorrow choose you." The next afternoon the theater was packed. Not a single empty seat. The lights dimmed. Bess stepped onto the stage. The room held its breath. She smiled at the microphone and began. "A lot of people ask me, is 60 too late to start over? I want to tell you, it's not. Your life doesn't begin when others approve. It begins the moment you stop compromising who you are. Today the first song I'll play is the one I used to love teaching my students, over 40 years ago. She sat. Her fingers fell. Moon River. The melody swept through the room like a sigh from a forgotten dream. Then came You've Got a Friend, and in that moment I saw mothers and daughters squeezing hands, old friends leaning into each other, silent tears sliding down smiling faces. Next, a playful bluesy tune she had rearranged herself. Half the room started clapping to the rhythm. One piece after another she radiated. Her music pulled every emotion out of the crowd like thread from a spool. And then for the last song she looked directly at me. "Faye," she said into the mic, "thank you. The greatest gift of my life has been having you as my daughter. You've been my rock, my mirror, my friend, and the deepest music I've ever played." She placed her hands on the keys. Rows and flows of angel hair. Both sides now began, delicate as lace. Some people cried. Some reached for the hands beside them. Some simply closed their eyes and listened like they were being told a secret only the music could explain. I sat in the front row, cradling the now healthy cat we'd rescued together. It rested peacefully in my lap, as if it too understood. As the last note lingered in the air, the room erupted into a full standing ovation that lasted half a minute. She stood, bowed deeply, and held her hand to her heart. And I knew that bow wasn't just for the audience. It was a farewell. Not to us, but to the world that had kept her silent for so long. To the cage. To the compromise. It was her way of saying goodbye. That night after the performance, the lights backstage were still glowing softly. Flowers, cards, and Polaroids cluttered the table like confetti after a celebration. Bess took off her green dress and let out a sigh, not heavy but deep. "I'm not tired," she said. "I just feel like I've finally set something down." When we stepped out of the theater, the night air was mild, the stars shy but present. She cradled the cat in her arms, like she was holding all the scattered pieces of her life, now sewn back together by her own hands. The next morning we were back to routine, tidying up the studio for her weekly piano class. The mailbox was full again. Cards from students, thank yous from strangers, and one special envelope. An official invitation from the TV station. They wanted to turn Granny's Keys into a quarterly series. They offered her the role of host for a new community spotlight segment. Each month, she'd interview another woman who had restarted her life after 60. She read the letter and smiled. "I used to listen to other people's stories," she said. "Looks like now it's my turn to ask the questions." And just like that, the stories of the past, hers, ours, had found their ending. 2 weeks later, a registered letter arrived. It was from Bobby. The note was brief. "Dad's not doing well. The doctor says he needs full-time care." He wanted to reach out, but didn't know what to say. At the bottom in smaller print, "Martha cleared out his last bank account last month." That proud, towering figure, who once thought he was too big to fall, was now alone, with no mirror to admire himself in and no spotlight to shield his collapse. I handed the letter to Mom. She read it in silence, sat by the window for a few minutes, then folded it neatly and dropped it in the trash. "He hasn't been part of my life for a long time," she said simply. No rage. No resentment. Just a clean, decisive peace. Bobby, we later heard, had moved into a subsidized apartment across town. The Tesla he once flaunted was sold off at a loss to cover the loan. He sent me a voice message. I never opened it. I deleted it without hesitation. This time there was no guilt. No doubt. Mom never mentioned them again. Her life had grown too full to make space for ghosts. Each morning before brunch, she'd check her messages and respond to the flurry of comments. At 3 o'clock sharp, her slow piano circle met in the studio. 10 students at a time, 3-week sessions, booked solid through the end of the year. She'd become something of a local celebrity. At the city's Senior Day celebration, she was the featured performer. The community center set her up in a sunlit atrium, fingers dancing over the keys beneath a banner that read, "Reinvention isn't just for the young. At 60 you can start your brightest chapter yet." I got used to taking her out and spending an extra 10 minutes helping her pose for photos with fans. She joked, "You've got to buy me a new coat. This one's been on camera too many times." That year she insisted on planning her own birthday. She rented the theater's multi-purpose hall and invited everyone. Former neighbors, old students, community center volunteers, Even the original 10 women from her very first piano story circle. I asked, "What do you want to do?" She smiled. "This time I don't want to just play music. I want to tell a story." That evening she stood center stage in her green dress. No piano. Just a mic. She told them about that winter night, about the cat, about being kicked out of her own home. About the red storage box and the crumpled dollars. About trembling fingers at a bank counter as she opened her first solo account. Then she looked at me, seated in the front row, and said, "For a long time I didn't think I had a name. I was Bobby's mom, Bard's wife, the lady from the kitchen. I thought I was a piece of furniture, a ladle in someone else's house. But this year I finally remembered. My name is Bess. I'm not a supporting role. I'm not an afterthought. I am me." My eyes blurred. I couldn't even rise to clap. Then she smiled through the lights, found my face again. "And you, my dearest daughter Faye, you were there when I took that name back. You were my witness. My strength. My friend. My clearest melody." The room thundered with applause. After the show I brought the cat to the stage. It wasn't the fragile, shivering kitten from the snowy night anymore. It was a survivor. Like us. I handed her the cat. She held it close and stepped toward the mic. She smiled, then said, softly but certain, "This year was the first time I've truly lived."